Do you ever hear sounds at night that you just can't explain? For Mateo, it started with a soft crying that seemed to drift from the river near his house. It wasn't a scary sound, not at first. It was lonely, almost gently like a whisper on the wind. He'd lie in bed, listening, trying to convince himself it was just the rustling of leaves or a distant animal. But night after night, the sound returned, a sad, constant presence just beyond his walls. It became a part of his nightly routine, a strange, mournful lullaby. One evening, something changed. The crying, which had always been a form of background noise, became sharp and clear, and then it spoke his name. Mateo. It wasn't a shout, but a soft, chilling whisper that seemed to come from right outside his window. A cold dread washed over him. How could it know his name? Curiosity, mixed with a healthy dose of fear, finally got the better of him. He had to see what was out there. He pushed himself out of bed and crept to the front door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stepped outside into the cool night air. The world was bathed in an eerie silver light from a full moon, and everything was silent except for that faint, beckoning cry. The moonlight danced on the surface of the river, making it look like a shimmering, moving pathway. It was hypnotic, almost beautiful, and it pulled him forward. He walked slowly toward the riverbank, his bare feet sinking slightly into the damp earth. The sound grew stronger with every step, drawing him closer to the water's edge, and that's when he saw her. Standing on the opposite bank was a figure, tall and slender, bathed in the same ghostly moonlight. She was a woman, draped entirely in a flowing white gown that seemed to blend with the mist rising from the water. Her face was hidden by a thin, white veil, obscuring her features completely. She stood perfectly still, like a statue, one pale hand outstretched, pointing directly at the dark, swirling currents of the river. The crying had stopped. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the water. As Mateo stared, frozen in place, she spoke again. Her voice was a fragile whisper, laced with an ancient sorrow. "Have you seen my children?" The question hung in the air, heavy and strange. Mateo didn't know what to say. Children? Out here, in the middle of the night. The sheer wrongness of the situation sent a jolt of terror through him. This was not a person in need of help. This was something else entirely. He shook his head, numbly, a small, jerky motion. That was all the answer he could manage before his survival instincts kicked in. He turned and ran. He didn't look back, didn't dare to. He scrambled back to his house, his breath coming in ragged gasps, fumbling with the lock before slamming the door shut and leaning against it, his body trembling. He stayed there for a long time, listening, but the crying didn't return. The silence that followed was somehow even more terrifying. He eventually crept into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin, but he didn't sleep a wink. He just stared at the ceiling, replaying the image of the woman in white, her voice echoing in his mind. The next morning, sunlight streamed through his window, and the world felt normal again. It must have been a dream, he told himself. A vivid, terrifying nightmare brought on by stress or a late dinner. He tried to laugh it off, to dismiss the memory of the veiled woman and her heartbreaking question. He got up, made some coffee, and went to look out his window, hoping the familiar morning view would erase the lingering fear. But when he looked out, his heart stopped. The river was closer. It wasn't a subtle change, not something he could have imagined. The water's edge, which had always been a good 50 yards from his house, was now barely 20 feet away. The grass between his porch and the bank was gone, replaced by the dark, muddy soil of the riverbed. It was as if the entire river had crept forward during the night, inching its way toward his home. It was impossible, unnatural, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the river was listening. It was waiting. That night, Mateo barricaded his doors and windows. He piled furniture against them, trying to create a fortress against the unknown. But he knew it was useless. As dusk fell, the crying started again. This time, it wasn't a distant whisper. It was right outside his house, a chorus of sorrowful wails that seemed to seep through the very walls. And then, he heard her voice again, no longer a whisper, but a clear, demanding cry. "Where are my children?" He huddled in the center of his living room, hands over his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was inside his head now. He could hear scraping sounds against the foundation of his house, the sound of waterlogged earth being pushed aside. He chanced to peek through a crack in the boarded-up window. The river was now at his doorstep. The dark water was lapping against his porch steps, swirling with a strange energy, and in the middle of the current, he saw her again. The woman in white. This time, her veil was slightly lifted by the wind, and for a split second, he saw her face. It was a canvas of pure agony. Air eyes, dark, empty sockets, and her mouth open in a silent, eternal scream. She wasn't pointing at the river anymore. She was pointing directly at him. "Give them back to me," she seemed to whisper on the wind. A promise and a threat all in one. Matteo stumbled back, falling to the floor, his mind reeling. What children? What did she want from him? He spent the night in a state of pure terror as the water level rose, seeping under the door and across the floorboards. The crying never stopped. It was a relentless assault on his sanity. By dawn, the water inside his house was ankle-deep, and the crying finally subsided with the first rays of sunlight. Exhausted and terrified, Matteo knew he couldn't stay. He had to leave. He packed a small bag with what little he could salvage, his hands shaking so badly he could barely zip it shut. As he opened his front door to leave, he saw that the river had receded back to its original position. The ground was soaked and muddy, but the water was back where it belonged. For a moment, a sliver of hope appeared. Maybe it was over. Maybe she was gone. But as he looked toward the riverbank, he saw something new. 2 small mounds of wet earth sat near the water's edge, shaped like small, unmarked graves, and resting on top of each one was a single, white water lily. A horrifying realization dawned on Matteo. She didn't think he had taken her children. She thought he was one of them. She wasn't looking for her lost children. She was trying to reclaim him, to pull him into the watery grave she had prepared. The river hadn't been moving closer to his house. It had been coming for him. Every night, the water would creep forward, an extension of her will, trying to drag him into its cold embrace. He didn't need any more convincing. He left his house, his home, everything he had ever known, and he didn't look back. He ran until the sound of the river was a distant memory. To this day, Matteo never lives near water. He avoids lakes, oceans, and especially rivers. He knows that she is still out there, the weeping woman in white, standing by the riverbank every night, her voice calling out for the children she lost. And he knows that the river, her eternal accomplice, is always listening, always waiting for a new name to call in the dead of night. So if you ever hear a faint crying on the wind, coming from a nearby body of water, don't ignore it. And whatever you do, don't answer, because it might just be calling for you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more chilling tales. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had a similar spooky experience. Stay safe, and see you next time. The city holds its breath after the sun dips below the horizon. The noise, the hustle, the endless river of people and cars. It all just pauses, and in that quiet, other things begin to stir. Have you ever walked past a playground at night? The silence there is different, heavier. It's a place built for noise, for the shouts and laughter of children. When that's gone, the emptiness feels wrong. There was a playground just like that, tucked away between a few old apartment buildings. During the day, it was a riot of color and sound, but after sunset, it transformed. The world would go still, except for one thing. The swings, even on the calmest, most windless nights, they would move. A gentle, rhythmic creak, back and forth, as if pushed by invisible hands. Most people in the neighborhood knew about it. They'd hurry past, pulling their coats a little tighter, not wanting to look too closely. It was just one of those local quirks, a spooky little story you'd tell new neighbors to see them shiver. But for Sofia, it was a magnet. Sofia lived in one of the buildings overlooking the park. She was 16, at that age, where the world feels both incredibly boring and full of hidden magic. She wasn't scared of the swinging swings. She was fascinated. She'd watch them from a bedroom window, trying to decipher their rhythm, trying to understand the force that moved them. It was a puzzle, and Sofia loved puzzles. One night, the air was unusually thick and heavy, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. The swings were moving, of course, their chains groaning a familiar, lonely song. But tonight, there was another sound. It was faint, almost lost beneath the creaking metal, but it was there. Sobbing. A soft, heartbreaking sound of pure grief. Sophia's curiosity finally overpowered her caution. She slipped out of her apartment, her sneakers silent on the pavement. The playground gate was unlocked. As always, she pushed it open, the rusted hinge letting out a loud screech that made her flinch. The sobbing stopped. The playground was bathed in the cold, orange glow of a single streetlight. The slide cast a long, distorted shadow. The merry-go-round was a dark, silent circle, and standing near the slide, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure. It was a woman. She was tall and slender, wearing a long, old-fashioned dress that seemed to brush against the wood chips on the ground without a sound. Her back was to Sophia. Her shoulders were shaking, though the sobs had ceased. She was staring intently at the empty swings, which continued their ghostly dance, back and forth, back and forth. She watched them as if she were waiting for someone to arrive, someone who was terribly late. Sophia's heart was hammering against her ribs. Every instinct told her to turn around, to run back to the safety of her brightly lit apartment, but she couldn't. The woman's sorrow was a tangible thing, a cold weight in the air that held Sophia in place. She took a hesitant step forward, the wood chips crunching under her feet. The sound was deafening in the silence. The woman didn't move. Sophia cleared her throat, her own voice sounding small and foreign. Are you okay?" The woman remained still for a long moment. Sophia thought maybe she hadn't heard. She was about to ask again when the woman spoke, her voice a whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "They should be here," Sophia asked, taking another step closer. "The children," the woman said, her voice trembling. "They always come." Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "There's no one here. It's latte." The woman finally turned, but she did it so slowly, so unnaturally. It was like watching a statue rotate on its pedestal. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the streetlight, but it was her eyes that made Sophia's breath catch in her throat. They were there, cavernous pools, and when the light hit them just right, they reflected the orange glow like polished glass, completely empty of any human warmth. "I'm waiting," the woman repeated, her glassy eyes fixed on Sophia. "I'm always waiting." Sophia was frozen, caught in that empty gaze. The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them in this lonely, forgotten space. The creaking of the swings was the only sound, a steady, hypnotic rhythm counting down the seconds. Finally, Sophia found her voice again, though it was barely a whisper. "Why? Why do you stay here?" The woman's expression didn't change, but a profound sadness seemed to emanate from her, so powerful it was almost a physical force. She turned her head back toward the endlessly moving swings. "I'm waiting for laughter," she said, her voice filled with a longing that spanned decades. This place, it was made for laughter. Without it, it's just empty. She looked back at Sophia, a flicker of something unreadable in her glass-like eyes. "And I can't bear the quiet." With that, a gust of wind, cold and sudden, swept through the playground. It kicked up dust and leaves, making Sophia squeeze her eyes shut for a second. When she opened them, the woman was gone. Not vanished in a puff of smoke, just not there anymore. As if she had been a mirage, a trick of the light and shadows. But the cold spot where she had stood remained, and the swings had stopped. For the first time all night, they hung perfectly still. Their chains silent. Sophia didn't wait to see if they would start again. She turned and ran, her sneakers pounding the pavement, the sound of her own frantic breathing loud in her ears. She didn't stop until she was back in her apartment, the door locked securely behind her. She stood there, her back pressed against the wood, her heart racing. From her window, she looked down at the playground. It was completely still. The swings were motionless. The slide was just a slide. It looked ordinary again, but Sophia knew it wasn't. She knew what was waiting in the silence. The next morning, The sun rose, burning away the shadows and the fear. Sophia felt like it had all been a dream, a vivid nightmare brought on by too many late nights. But when she looked out her window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There was yellow tape cordoning off the playground entrance. A stark, official-looking sign was hammered into the grass. It read, "Park closed indefinitely by order of the city." Sophia ran downstairs. A small group of neighbors had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves. "Why is it closed?" someone asked. "Was there an accident?" "I don't know." An old man who had lived in the building for 50 years replied, shaking his head. "I just woke up and it was like this. Strange. I can't even remember the last time they closed it." Sophia asked everyone she could. She went to the library and looked through old town records and newspaper archives. She searched for accidents, for tragedies, for anything connected to that specific playground. She found nothing. It was as if the playground's history had been wiped clean. No one remembered why it was being closed. No one even seemed to remember playing there as a child. It had just been there. And now it was gone. The playground remained closed. The swings were eventually taken down, the slide dismantled. Grass grew over the patches where the equipment once stood. Within a few years, it was just an empty, overgrown lot. The city and the neighborhood seemed to collectively forget that a playground had ever been there at all. But Sophia never forgot. Sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, she thinks she can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic creaking. And underneath it, a sound even quieter. A whisper, carried on the breeze, waiting for an answer, waiting for laughter that will never come. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the unknown. Stay curious. Have you ever heard a sound so hauntingly beautiful that it gets stuck in your head, playing on a loop you can't escape? For Luis, that sound wasn't a catchy pop song or a nostalgic tune from his childhood. It was a melody that visited him only in the dead of night, a ghost in the form of music. It all started on a Tuesday. The clock on Luis's nightstand blinked to 13 a.m. when he first heard it, a soft, ethereal song drifting through his open window. It wasn't coming from a neighbor's radio or a passing car. This was different. The melody was filled with a profound sadness, a kind of longing that resonated deep in his bones. It was beautiful, but in a way that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The voice was female, clear as a bell, yet it felt ancient, like it had been sung for centuries. The first night, Luis dismissed it. He figured he was dreaming, or maybe it was just the wind playing tricks on his tired mind. Eroyetober pulled the pillow over his head, and eventually drifted back to sleep. But the next night, it happened again. Exactly at 2:30 a.m. The same sad, beautiful song. This time, he was wide awake. He sat up in bed, straining to listen. The song was so clear it felt like the singer was right there in his garden. It was a lullaby, he realized, but one meant to soothe a broken heart, not a sleeping child. This went on for a week. Every single night, like clockwork. Las 2:13 alto m. The song would begin, float through his window for about 10 minutes, and then fade into silence, leaving Luis alone in the dark with the echo of its sorrow. He started to feel a strange connection to it. During the day, he'd find himself humming the tune without realizing it. He tried to search for it online, typing descriptions like sad lullaby or haunting female vocal, but nothing matched. It was a song that, as far as the internet was concerned, didn't exist. Curiosity began to gnaw at him, slowly overriding his fear. Who was this mysterious singer? Why, this time, every night? Ad tu. No. So, on the 8th night, Luis prepared himself. He sat by the window, heart pounding in his chest, waiting. The digital numbers on his clock crept closer. To 10, las 12:11. To 12. He held his breath. And then, at 2:13, it started. The voice was even clearer this time, so close. He slowly, carefully, peeked through the blinds. His street was empty, bathed in the pale orange glow of the streetlights. A thick fog had rolled in, blanketing everything in a silent, gray shroud. And there, in the middle of the fog, directly across the street, He saw her. It was a woman, or the silhouette of one. Her form was hazy, indistinct, as if she were made of the fog itself. She was standing perfectly still, her back to him, facing the empty park. Her long hair flowed down her back, unmoving in the windless night. As she sang, she swayed gently from side to side, a slow, rhythmic, rocking motion. Her arms were cradled in front of her, as if she were holding something precious, something invisible to his eyes. A chill, colder than the night air, snaked down Luce's spine. This wasn't a neighbor with insomnia. This was something else. Something not quite of this world. He watched, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. The woman just stood there, rocking and singing her heartbreaking song to the empty, foggy park. He couldn't see her face, and he found himself both terrified and desperate to see it. He couldn't take it anymore. His hand trembled as he yanked the cord, shutting the blinds tight. He stumbled back from the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the image, the sound. But it was no use. The singing didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder. He clapped his hands over his ears, but the song wasn't outside anymore. It was inside his room, inside his head. The beautiful, mournful voice filled every corner of the space, every corner of his mind, clear and overpowering. There was no escape. He scrambled into bed, pulling the covers over his head, but the music was part of him now. It was as if she had poured her song directly into his soul. He lay there, trembling in the dark, until the first hint of dawn began to creep through the edges of his curtains, and just as suddenly as it had begun, the song stopped. Silence. A heavy, profound silence that was almost as deafening as the music had been. Luis didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning finally came, he felt exhausted, hollowed out. He cautiously opened the curtains. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The fog was gone. The street was empty. There was no sign of the woman. It was as if she had never been there. He went about his day in a daze. The world seemed muted, distant. But the song remained. It was no longer an external sound, but an internal one. He could hum every single note, every intricate turn of the melody, every sorrowful pause. He could recall the lyrics, though they were in a language he didn't understand, a string of soft, sighing words. He had never heard this song before in his life. He had never studied music, yet he knew it perfectly. He knew it by heart. Days turned into weeks. The nightly visits at 2:30 a.m. stopped. The woman in the fog never reappeared, but the song never left Luis. It became the soundtrack to his life. He'd hum it while making coffee, whistle it on his way to work. Sometimes, he'd wake up in the middle of the night, the melody on his lips, a phantom lullaby for a phantom child. He never told anyone. How could he explain it? That a ghost had taught him a song. That her sadness now lived inside him. He accepted it as a part of himself. A strange, beautiful, and terrifying gift. He learned to live with a melody that no one else could hear. Years passed. Luis grew older. He moved away from that house, from that street. He built a new life. But every now and then, on a quiet, foggy night, he would find himself standing by a window, looking out into the darkness, and without thinking, he would begin to hum. A soft, sad song, a lullaby for something unseen, a melody from a world just outside the window. He never knew who the woman was, or what she had lost, but he carried her song, and in a way, he carried her story, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that he would carry it for the rest of his life. Thanks for watching. If you have your own unexplained stories, share them in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more mysteries that linger in the quiet corners of our world. Stay curious, and maybe keep your windows closed after 2 a.m. They say old hotels have souls, that the memories of everyone who's ever stayed there seep into the very walls. But some places hold on to more than just memories. They hold on to echoes, to whispers, to the things that refuse to be forgotten. This is the story of room 313, and the mirror that held a secret darker than any shadow. Our story begins with Elena, a traveler with a penchant for places that felt lived in. Places with a history. She'd chosen the Grand Hotel Excelsior for its faded Victorian charm, its creaking floorboards, and the promise of a quiet weekend away from the city's relentless hum. After a long drive, all she wanted was a hot shower and a soft bed. She tossed her keys on the antique dresser in room 313 and headed for the ensuite bathroom. The bathroom was a relic of a bygone era. The tiles were cracked, the brass fixtures tarnished, and a large, ornate mirror hung over the pedestal sink. It was the kind of mirror that seemed to have watched 100 years of secrets unfold. Elena turned on the hot water, and soon steam filled the small room, clouding the air and fogging the glass. She stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around herself. Feeling the day's fatigue start to melt away, she went to the sink, her hand reaching out to wipe a clear circle on the steamy mirror. But as her fingers moved across the glass, she froze. The condensation wasn't just clearing, it was writing. Letters were forming, etched into the fog as if by an invisible finger. 4 simple, chilling words appeared. Have you seen them? Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. A prank. Was this some kind of trick mirror? She squinted, leaning closer. The words were perfectly formed. Too perfect for a simple prank. A shiver that had nothing to do with the post-shower chill snaked down her spine. She shook her head, trying to rationalize it. It was late. She was tired. Her mind was playing tricks on her. She wiped the entire mirror clean with the edge of her towel, erasing the spectral message. For a moment she saw only her own reflection staring back wide-eyed, hair damp, a towel clutched to her chest. But then, something shifted. The reflection wasn't just hers anymore. Behind her own image, another figure began to materialize, faint at first, like a photograph developing in slow motion. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown that seemed to belong to another century. Her hair was long and dark, but her face was a blur, indistinct and wavering as if seen through a curtain of water. Her form was translucent, the tiled wall visible right through her. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. Her mind screamed, but her body was paralyzed. The woman in the mirror didn't move. She just stood there, a silent, sorrowful sentinel behind Elena's reflection. Who was she? What did she want? The question from the glass echoed in her mind. Have you seen them? Gathering every ounce of courage she possessed, Elena spun around. Her back hit the cold tiles of the wall. The bathroom was empty. The air was still thick with steam, but there was no one there. The only sound was the frantic pounding of her own heart. She was alone. Slowly, hesitantly, she turned back to the mirror. Her reflection stared back, pale and terrified. But the woman in white was gone. There was only Elena. Relief washed over her, so potent it made her feel weak. It was a hallucination, just stress and exhaustion. She had to get a grip. But then she looked closer. She looked into her reflection's eyes, and the relief curdled into pure, unadulterated terror. Those weren't her eyes. Her own eyes were a warm, familiar brown. The eyes staring back at her from the mirror were a pale, washed-out blue, filled with a bottomless, ancient sadness that didn't belong to her. They were the eyes of a stranger trapped within her own face. And as she watched, a single, perfect tear welled up in the corner of her reflection's left eye and traced a path down its cheek. Elena stumbled backward, away from the mirror, her hand flying to her own face. Her cheeks were dry. She wasn't crying, but her reflection was. It was weeping silently, its strange blue eyes pleading with her. A sob escaped her lips as she scrambled out of the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind her. She didn't pack. She didn't grab her keys. She ran from room 313, down the hallway, past the portraits of forgotten founders, and didn't stop until she was out in the cold night air. Elena never returned to the Grand Hotel Excelsior. She never found out who the woman in the mirror was, or who they were that the spirit was so desperate to find. But the story of room 313 didn't end with her. 4 years afterward, guests who stayed in the rooms nearby would complain of a strange noise. It wasn't loud, just a soft, persistent sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was the sound of quiet weeping. Some said it came from the hallway, others from the room next door. But those with a keen ear, those who dared to press